Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Audit and Finance Standing Committee meeting for Wednesday, September 15th. I'm Paul Russell, the Councillor for Lower Sackville. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is 10:04 a.m. As is standard with the virtual format of these meetings, I'd like to run through the councillors who are online and some of the key staff who we might be requiring as well for this meeting. So let's start with Councillor Daigle Gammon, District 1. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, fellow colleagues and staff. All set for our meeting today. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thank you. Councillor Hensby, District 2.
Good morning, all. Looking forward to the discussions today.
Good morning. Councillor Purdy, District 4.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Councillor Cleary, are you with us yet? I don't see you in the list, so hopefully you will be able to join us soon. Councillor Morse, District 10.
Good morning, everyone from Clayton Park.
Good morning. I don't see the mayor with us yet either. Evangeline Coleman said, the Auditor General, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Ashley Maxwell.
Good morning.
Good morning. And folks from Halifax Fire, who will be joining us a little bit later on, but just do an audio video check anyway.
You want to tap in and do the audio?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good morning, Councillor. We are here waiting.
Beautiful, thank you. And Jerry Blackwood, we saw you before the meeting, but good morning.
Good morning. Present.
Good morning. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of August 18th of 2021. Can I please get a motion to approve the minutes of August 18th?
So moved.
Councillor Daigle Gammon, thank you very
Seconded.
much. Seconded by Councillor Hensby, thank you very much. Are there any errors or omissions from those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of the minutes of August 18th, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. Great, the minutes pass. The approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Over to the clerk, do we have any changes this morning?
Good morning, Chair, and the rest of the committee. No, I have the clerk's office has not received any requests for additions or deletions for today's meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. And can I have a motion to approve the order of business and additions and deletions, please?
I move. Morse, Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Purdy, thank you very much. Are there any requests for change from the Audit and Finance Committee? Not hearing any. All in favor of the order of business, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. Great. Thank you very much. We have an agenda. Business arising out of the minutes is none. Call for declaration of conflicts of interest. Not seeing any. Okay, thank you. Motions of reconsideration is none. Motions of rescission is none. Consideration of deferred business is none. Notices of tabled matters is none. Correspondence, petitions, and delegations. Over to the clerk.
Thank you, Chair. The clerk's office did not receive any correspondence for this meeting nor notification of petitions.
Great, thank you very much. And is there any correspondence or petitions from members of the committee? Nothing? Okay. And there are no presentations. There are no information items brought forward. So we are on to item 12.1.1, management of the fire inspection program audit. And I'd like to turn the floor over to Evangeline Coleman said, the Auditor General. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen and run my presentation. So just bear with me for a moment. Okay. So I assume you can now see the presentation running.
We can see the presentation. It's not in presentation mode.
There, it should be.
There it
now.
is. Yes.
My mouse click didn't work the first time. Okay, good morning. I just wanted to say with me this morning before I start is Ashley Maxwell, who was the lead for this particular audit, and Ashley and I will share presentation duties this morning. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about our management of the fire inspection program audit. This audit looked at oversight of the fire inspection program and management of legislated fire inspection processes. Just by way of background, in HRM, some buildings may be inspected by the Provincial Office of the Fire Marshal, and of course those would not have been within the scope of our audit, and then others by Halifax Fire, which is within the scope of what we looked at. I'll start by providing a brief overview. We found Halifax Fire are failing to effectively manage important aspects of the fire inspection program. Oversight needs improvement. There is a need for detailed plans to address risks. And fire needs to determine the overall resources that are needed for this program area. Halifax Fire is not meeting its legislated obligations to establish an adequate fire inspection system and in terms of timing of fire inspections. We found violations are followed up, but not always in a timely manner. I'll walk you through some of the detailed results, starting with the oversight section. Significant improvements are needed in oversight of the fire inspection program. Management identified concerns with the organizational structure of the division responsible for fire inspections and their ability to meet their mandate with that structure. They introduced changes, created fire inspector positions, and those positions had different qualifications and focused only on completing fire inspections. In August 2021, there were 8 fire inspector positions. We understand management has additional structure changes planned. Halifax Fire Management told us that there are not enough fire inspectors to complete all inspection duties in a timely manner, but at this point, they do not know how many they need in order to complete all of their responsibilities. Further changes are planned, as I said, but we found there were no detailed plans or timelines for those changes. Halifax Fire Management identified the fire inspection program as a risk area. However, fire management have not determined how often buildings should be inspected, and they do not know the resources needed. Additionally, there are no comprehensive plans to address these issues. We expected plans that were detailed, documented. In our experience, when plans are not written down, things often take longer or don't reach completion at all. Fire inspections are important for enforcement of the fire code and also to educate property and business owners. I'll move along to timeliness of inspections. Halifax Fire is not managing and meeting its legislated responsibilities in this regard. Inspections on many buildings are not timely. Overall, 40% of the inspections we sampled were late. Fire regulations require that certain buildings be inspected every 3 years. 45% of the inspections we looked at for that building type were late. 9 of 20 were not inspected within the 3-year requirement. For other building types, legislation requires that Halifax Fire establish a system of inspections. Several years ago, in 2009, management determined inspection frequencies for these various building types. However, they told us they don't know if those frequencies are appropriate and they have not been revisited. We tested 38 inspections of those building types and found 37% did not meet the timelines that had been established in 2009. We also found Halifax Fire does not have a reliable list of inspectable buildings. There is a list that was created in 2019. It was created manually in a spreadsheet, which is prone to error. Anything that's manually created is prone to error. There is a risk because of that list was not complete even in 2019 when it was first created. However, it also has not been updated since that time. However, it is used to schedule fire inspections. We also note that HRM implemented a new building permitting system in December of 2020. And since that time, Halifax Fire's system has not been updated with new property data. I'm going to turn things over to Ashley to walk you through the next several slides.
All right, thank you, Evangeline. So the next couple of slides will cover compliance orders and follow-up. During fire inspections, fire safety violations may be identified. Fire inspection staff typically capture these violations in an order to comply that's issued to the business or property owner. 24 of the 30 inspections we sampled had violations. For 6 inspections, no order to comply was issued. In one case, the violations were resolved the same day, therefore it is reasonable no order was issued. In another 3 cases, a notice to comply was issued. Management told us these notices cannot be legally enforced and are no longer used. In the other 2 cases, although no order was issued, the violations were followed up within a reasonable time frame. It is important to issue and maintain correspondence in case of appeal or legal proceeding. We have recommended Halifax Fire issue orders to comply where appropriate and maintain key correspondence related to fire inspections. We found Halifax Fire staff followed up most violations that were noted during inspections to ensure compliance. However, it was not consistently done in a timely manner. Timely follow-up of fire safety violations is important to make sure public safety risks are quickly dealt with. We sampled 30 inspections completed by fire inspection staff. 24 noted fire safety violations for correction. Of these, 1 was not followed up. In another 4 cases, there were long delays following up. Division management told us they believe the delays were due to granting extensions, but there is no evidence of this. Documenting these details is important, so deadlines are recorded and to ensure there is documentation should Halifax Fire need to take enforcement steps. We also looked at 30 limited scope fire inspections. So limited scope fire inspections are often completed by certain fire officers within operations. 25 of the 30 limited scope inspections we looked at noted fire safety violations, and all violations were followed up to ensure compliance. However, 9 were not followed up within the established timelines. We were told by scheduling staff this is primarily due to timing issues between the building owners and the operational fire officers who were completing the inspection. Next slide, please. Some follow-up of limited scope inspections is completed by fire inspection staff in the fire prevention division. For example, if an operational fire officer notes a violation that is not covered by their inspection checklist, or if a violation is still outstanding during a follow-up visit, additional follow-up is completed by a fire inspection staff member. However, there's no process to prioritize these fire inspections after they've been flagged for further investigation. 16 of the 25 limited scope fire inspections with violations that we sampled were escalated to the fire inspection staff for follow-up. However, follow-up was not completed in a timely manner. On average, it took 97 days for the fire inspection staff to follow up. And in one case, it took fire inspection staff 16 months to follow up. We have recommended Halifax Fire determine and communicate follow-up timelines for limited scope inspections that have been escalated to fire inspection staff and monitor for completion dates. Next slide, please. We also looked at quality assurance for fire inspections. There is limited quality assurance to confirm fire inspections were properly completed and documented. Management tracks pending inspections and follows up with inspection staff. However, we expected management to regularly review a sample of fire inspections to confirm they were completed properly and adequately documented. We found there's no standard approach to document inspections completed by fire inspection staff, making it hard to determine if key items were missed during the inspection. A process was developed in August 2020 that outlines minimum documentation to maintain in inspection files, but this is not followed or enforced. Based on interviews with fire inspection staff, there was no consistent understanding of what must be documented in hard copy inspection files. Without a standard approach, Halifax Fire may not have key information required if there is an appeal or legal proceeding. It could also make quality assurance reviews more difficult. We have recommended Halifax Fire develop and implement a quality assurance process to monitor that fire inspections are properly completed and documented. Fire inspection policies and procedures were outdated. Most have not been reviewed since 2012, and they do not reflect current operations. Management told us they need to be revised. We've recommended that Halifax Fire updates its fire inspection policies and procedures and establishes a review process to maintain them. Next slide, please. There is limited management of fire inspection staff productivity. Division management has not determined the number of fire inspection staff should complete. As Evangeline touched on earlier, fire inspection staff were given lists of buildings to inspect. Each of these lists has hundreds of buildings. Additionally, fire inspection staff also receive requests to complete fire inspections from other sources, such as requests from businesses that need a fire inspection to obtain a liquor license, or fire safety complaints from members of the public. Some fire inspection staff also have other duties related to fire investigations and public education. While there are deadlines for some requests that fire inspection staff handle, management has not given fire inspection staff direction on how to prioritize most aspects of their work. As a result, fire inspection resources may not be used effectively. We have recommended Halifax Fire establish expectations for fire inspection staff productivity and provide staff with guidance on how to prioritize inspections and other duties. Next slide, please. The audit also looked at training. We found management has identified training requirements for fire inspection staff. Fire inspection staff include two different positions. There's fire prevention officers and fire inspectors. Both are part of the fire prevention division and are responsible for completing fire inspections. Fire prevention officers are expected to complete level 1 and level 2 fire inspector certifications within 3 years of coming into the role. These are certifications offered by the Fire Inspectors Association of Nova Scotia. However, it actually takes 6 years to complete them due to limited course offerings. This makes it impossible for fire prevention officers to meet training requirements in the timeframe management has established. We looked at training records for 3 of the fire prevention officers and found 1 had completed both fire inspector certifications in 8 years. 1 had completed level 1 certification in 2 years, and 1 had not yet completed any inspector training. Division management told us they discussed developing an internal training program to address the limited course availability. However, there are no concrete plans with timelines to do so. They are also investigating training options from other jurisdictions, but have not determined whether they are appropriate. In 2019, the fire inspectors positions were created, and this was in addition to the existing fire prevention officers. Fire inspectors are required to either have building official or fire inspector certification when hired. If they do not have the fire inspector training, management told us staff are expected to complete it, but management has not set a timeline for completion. We looked at training records for 3 of the fire inspectors. All 3 had completed some fire inspector courses, but none had completed all courses required for the level 1 certification. All were in their roles for 2 years, and during that time, some courses were not offered due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is important staff receive training in a timely manner to ensure they have appropriate skills to perform fire inspections. We have recommended Halifax Fire develop concrete plans with timelines for fire inspection staff to receive sufficient training in a timely manner. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Evangeline.
Thanks, Ashley. Moving along to performance indicators. There is only one indicator for the fire prevention division, and that's the division that includes fire inspection program. That indicator is the percentage of completed legislated inspections. It is reported in Halifax Fire's annual business plan. However, Halifax Fire could not provide us with support for how this had been calculated. The target is low. It's about 1/5 to 1/3, depending on the year, of inspections that Halifax Fire is required to complete. Senior management told us they did not know if the target was reasonable. It also includes limited scope inspections carried out by operational officers. And as discussed, these don't cover all the areas a typical fire inspection would. It is not clear to us whether these meet legislated obligations for fire inspection, although fire management told us they believe they do. I wanted to make an overall comment aside from this audit. We have had this issue on a couple of other audits over the past year or two, where management does not have support for information or numbers calculated in reports to regional council, including business plans. I'm sure management have calculated these numbers. However, they're not retaining the support. So that means that each time that business plan number needs to be determined, it's getting started from scratch, which is inefficient. And it also introduces the risk that the number isn't being calculated. In this instance, these performance indicators, but as I said, we've had other examples, that something isn't calculated consistently from one year to the next. And so you may not truly be comparing apples to apples. I wanted to highlight this for councillors because I think it is important that this be addressed. During fieldwork, we came across issues with communication between Halifax Fire and Planning and Development. Halifax Fire management told us that certain subdivisions did not have adequate fire suppression. Planning and Development told us they were not aware of fire's concerns. We looked at 3 subdivision approvals for subdivisions that fire had indicated to us were potential issues. We found 2 of those had been provided to fire for feedback during the subdivision planning process. We could find an indication that fire provided feedback on only 1 of those 2, and there was nothing in the file on how that feedback had been addressed. Halifax Fire Management told us that dry hydrants should be installed in a number of areas to address these concerns with adequate fire suppression or fire safety specifications. However, we found Halifax Fire doesn't have a fulsome and complete list of where and when dry hydrants will be installed. So to wrap up the presentation, this report has 14 recommendations. All have been accepted by management. Timely action is needed to meet legislated obligations and to ensure the fire code is enforced. As is our practice, we will follow up in 18 months, and we expect 80% of our recommendations will be complete by that time. We will report those results to you after our follow-up. And that concludes our presentation, and we'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Evangeline and Ashley, for that very fulsome presentation. I appreciate the amount of work that goes into this and all of the audits that you put together. I would like to ask any councillors who have questions to please indicate that in the chat, and then we can proceed from there. So, Councillor Morris, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Russell, and thank you very much to the team for the report. Yes, an extraordinary amount of work, as always, and very concerning to see this level of gap in so many areas of inspections. I have a few questions about, I'm looking for some examples or specifics to help me understand better what you're telling us. Are you able to say which types of buildings or specific examples of buildings that are perhaps the ones that should be inspected every 3 years? Which are they? Are we talking about the Forum, for example, or which types of buildings? I guess I'm wondering if this is the first time you've audited and if there's any change from previous years. And which subdivisions are we talking about that do not have plans? And could you tell us where the dry hydrants should be? Thank you.
Okay, just bear with me for a moment.
I'm sure that the Auditor General has some information on that, but I would also ask Halifax Fire if there is information that they would be able to provide to please step in as required. Thank you.
Sure, and I'll start out and provide you with some information. So there's certain types of buildings that are required to be inspected every 3 years by the Fire Safety Act, and they're called assembly buildings. So it's things like theaters, churches, arenas, and so on. Then there's other types of buildings that have different frequencies. And those might be things like apartments, banks, stores, department stores, and so on. So that's just, hopefully that gives you a sense. There's quite a detailed list of the different types of buildings. You asked if we had audited this area before. We have not. This is the first time my office has looked at this. You also asked which subdivisions. There are a small number of subdivisions mentioned in the report. Just give me 1 second, on page 17. So the ones that happen to be mentioned in the report are Indigo Shores, West Hills subdivision, and White Hills subdivision. Those were the 3 that we happened to pick to sample. Other subdivisions were brought to our attention as being areas of concern as well. And in terms of where dry hydrants are needed, our understanding during the audit from talking with Halifax Fire Management is that there are many areas where dry hydrants are needed. I believe there is some capital funding in the budget for that, and there may be a list for the current year, but there's not an overall and fulsome list of everywhere that they're required and some sort of plan to move towards getting dry hydrants in all of those locations. So that would cover the information that I can provide from the audit.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. And in terms of reasons for the gaps and the issues, is it mainly resources, financial resources?
Do you mean overall on the audit?
Yes, overall, yes.
We, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, what we understood from talking with Halifax Fire Management is that they had some concerns with the structure of the division. That they felt did not best allow them to meet their mandate. And so some structural changes were initiated. We understand further changes are planned. However, there aren't any detailed plans that document exactly what those changes are and timelines for them. And I guess that was the biggest issue as well. There was an indication that management does not believe they have adequate resources to inspect all of the buildings. However, as indicated in the report, management hasn't determined what resources they do need in total.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hensby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just some quick questions. In regards to dry hydrants and stuff, I assume these will be the new subdivisions where we expect the developers to put them in as part of the infrastructure as they develop a subdivision. Or these other areas. I know I've been working with the fire department in my area in regards to where the dry hydrants are currently at. They have a full inventory of those and they go out and inspect them, make sure they're operational, but they're also assessing where there's shortcomings in regards to where there ought to be others. There is money in the capital budget for the placement of those, put them in a priority list. But I was kind of curious about the new subdivisions. Is that an expectation of the developer put in, or is that infrastructure the municipality put in after the fact? So to have that clarification.
So these are areas that FAR had pointed out to us that they believe dry hydrants are needed, that they are not in. I believe there are a number of older subdivisions that are included. If you want additional details on that, I think you'd need to talk to Halifax Fire Management about what their process is for that. I presume since they're in HRM's capital budget that they're dry hydrants that Fire feels HRM is responsible to put in.
In regards to the category of buildings you talk about by legislation, do you think that perhaps a 3-year cycle might be too frequent for some of our buildings, or with, the expectation of the sprinklers and everything else like that? And, you know, should some of these inspections, could they be privatized? I know, for instance, for fire hydrants, for fire extinguishers and fire alarms and stuff, there's a lot of inspection companies that go out and do that and certify that they're done on an annual basis. But I was kind of curious in regards to the fires, these fire investigations or these fire reports, how many can they be done by the private sector versus what has to be done in-house by our own fire department?
So some of those would be areas that would have to be management's determination of how it is going to meet legislated obligations. In terms of the 3-year requirement, the Fire Safety Act specifies certain buildings, says they have to be inspected within 3 years. And then other than that, for buildings that don't fall into that category, it says that the fire inspection group, so in this case, it would be Halifax Fire, is responsible for determining a system of fire inspections. So presumably that would include the frequency at which other types of buildings would be inspected. So that's the area where those frequencies were quite old, and management told us they didn't know if they were still appropriate or not. However, they were the only frequencies that were available to us, so we did use them as a measuring stick when we sampled. I don't have an opinion on whether or not 3 years is sufficient, too often, or not often enough. An Auditor General's role is to look at how policy is applied, not to comment on whether or not the policy itself is appropriate. That particular policy does come from a piece of provincial legislation. And in terms of, you know, what sort of should be done by Halifax Fire versus external companies and so on, Halifax Fire has been given the legislative responsibility, and HRM has been given the legislative responsibility from the province for a system of fire inspections. And so at that point, it is up to HRM, Halifax Fire, to determine how that system of fire inspections should be carried out in order to meet those responsibilities.
I was looking at some of the categories and stuff, and one that's kind of stood out for me was, for instance, bleachers and grandstands. I can understand, like, now there's no public smoking allowed in those areas and stuff, so I'm not sure what kind of fire threat there may be in bleachers and grandstands. That'd be more of a structural issue, and I thought that the building inspector would provide that type of assurance that they're built to a safe standard versus a fire safety issue. So just kind of curious in regards to some of these things that need to be inspected. I kind of question, is that a fire department role? Or because in the back of the day when smoking was allowed in public areas like bleachers and grandstands could be a potential problem, but now that's not an issue. So just kind of curious of how some of these categories and examples of occupancy, are they out to date and perhaps should be updated?
So again, this comes from building code occupancy classifications. So that would not be a question for me to answer. I will say there are a number of these buildings that are not outdoor gathering areas, things like arenas, restaurants, churches, theaters, and so on, would have indoor space.
And my last comment would be in regards to the amount of building going on in our municipality and stuff, and new structures and stuff. We're just adding to the inventory of things that need to be inspected for the first time and then re-inspected periodically as required by legislation. Do you feel we have adequate manpower supply to constantly keep up with the demand?
That's a determination that management needs to make. When we talked with Halifax Fire Management, they told us they don't believe they have adequate resources. However, they also told us that they had not determined what the resources that are required are. So that is a determination for management, whether or not resources are adequate to meet the areas they're accountable for.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Hensby, for those questions. I would like to give Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency the opportunity to respond. Chief Stubing, Deputy Chief Beals, the floor is yours.
You're good.
And we cannot, you are fuzzy, but we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And I guess just to let you know, I'm playing here.
We're having a very difficult time hearing you.
You probably got to move up, I'm thinking.
So I'll move closer to the microphone. Is this better?
That is better, yes. Thank
Is this
you.
better? So you'll notice I'm flanked by some of the members of our management team here, largely our division chief from fire prevention.
We are still, Chief Stubing, we are still having quite a bit of difficulty hearing you. I'm not sure why at this point.
Is the microphone on your laptop, Corey?
Yeah, it is on. Peter's not here.
Chief Beals, you are loud and clear. It's just Chief Stubing we can't hear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You hear me at this location?
This,
Which microphone? Pick the Plantronics.
right here, echo canceling speaker.
Pick that.
This. Yeah, Chief, try that. You should be okay.
Comms check?
At this point, whoever was speaking just a second ago was coming clearly.
So it should be clear now.
Okay, so okay.
Yes, it is.
All right. Apologize for our.
No, Chief, still can't hear you, but we can hear Corey clearly.
Perhaps, sorry to interrupt, and I think Annie might be speaking to this, have Chief Beals pass his laptop just over to the chief. It's a settings, but rather than try and fix the settings, let's just, if he can pass the laptop over.
Thank you, Krista. Yeah, my suggestion here would be that the setup of attempting to have everyone join from the same room and be live streamed from that location is not conducive to this meeting space. So I believe, yeah, joining from the individual screen from Corey's computer would likely be the best option in terms of audio and visual for the meeting.
All right, I'll disconnect. Can you give us just 1 second? I'll just connect and we'll go directly from the laptop.
Actually, right now we hear you perfectly.
So all Chief Beals needs to do is, or Deputy Chief needs to do is pass his laptop literally to Chief Stubing to hear the microphone set up.
Mr. Chair, might I potentially suggest that we move on to the next speaker, and Halifax Fire can come back with the answers to the questions from the previous speaker?
My concern is that Halifax Fire would fall behind with many of the comments that they would have to be able to respond to. My preference would be to give them another minute, and if we're able to connect with them, then great, and if not, then absolutely let's move on.
Can you hear me okay now, Mr. Chair?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Chief.
Is this going to connect to yours?
Disconnected.
Okay, try now.
Just give us 1 more second here. We're trying to get audio on our end.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to move
Can
on
you hear
to-
me now?
We could hear half of what you said and then it cut out. At this point, I'd like to move along to Councillor Daigle Gammon and give Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency an opportunity to come back after Councillor Daigle Gammon has had a chance to pose her questions. So go ahead, Councillor Daigle Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Evangeline and Ashley. If every time we come to this and there's an Auditor General report, I'm always excited because we get to learn so much and we get to understand the absolute value that you bring to HRM. So thank you for that. It is really concerning around the sort of the status of fire inspections and this report. So I'm among other things worried about an 18-month timeline for when we get to find out compliance and coming to 80% compliance in 18 months. Is there any way that can be updated? So I know that probably it's the standard, but I guess I'm really worried also about what is the risk to HRM in the absence of this work being done. Are we then at risk should something happen as a result of, our documentation not being in order, our inspections not being in order, the order to comply? I'm curious about why they were stopped, saying that they weren't enforceable. So I am curious about that. I would like to know a little bit more on that issue. And again, just that I feel the risk for HRM pretty significantly. So I'm just wondering if there are interim, 6-month, 12-month, 18-month, but if there is an option to sort of stay on top of this. So that would be my first question. Thank you. And probably, Mr. Chair, I would ask also that after the open discussion that there's an in-camera conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Daigle Gammon. Over to the clerk's office, if you are able to send around that in-camera meeting notice, please do. And go ahead, Evangeline.
Thank you. So if I can just make one additional comment from the questions from the previous councillor, the building types in the appendix in the report are not an exhaustive list. It is important to note that they're examples only. So just thought I'd point that out. In terms of the 18-month follow-up, that is our standard process. And this is not the first audit where I have been asked whether or not following up more frequently by our office might be appropriate. And these are my thoughts on that. We established that on a number of bases. One is 18 months is a reasonable time, we believe, for the majority of recommendations to be implemented. Certain things, for example, new IT systems are required, or there's a lot of funding required and a lot of changes. Some things can take a little longer, and that's why it's not 100% in 18 months. And so that provides some wiggle room, I guess, for management to have certain areas that may go a little longer than 18, but that's why we picked the 18. And the other reason has to do with resourcing of my office. So we're not a huge office, and we are trying to make the best use of our audit resources that we can, and focusing on a mix of following up what we've already done and identified risks to management and to council, and also looking at new areas that either haven't been looked at in a while or perhaps haven't been looked at all, because the Office of the Auditor General in HRM is still a relatively young office. It's been around for about 12 or 13 years. And so from my perspective, I believe it's important to try to stick to that 18-month follow-up. That said, I believe there are processes that can be put in place that are in fact considered best practices for audit committees that would address some of those concerns. So our job at that 18-month mark, or my job, is to provide independent assurance that things are completed, hopefully. On an interim basis, so what is considered, I guess, a best practice for audit committees is that the audit committee would ask management for an action plan after every audit report on how recommendations are going to be dealt with. And an action plan would include a fair bit of detail of timelines and so on. And sometimes you see that in responses, but the reality is management doesn't have, they have a few weeks with the draft report to develop their recommendation responses, and getting to a point where they can say this will be done by X date might take a little longer than that. And so that action plan, for example, if audit committee required an action plan a month after this meeting for any audit, then management would have had a couple of months by that point in time, maybe even a little more, to sort of come up with what's that look like and when do we think we can deal with these things. And then following up on those action plans and asking management to provide you with some indication of where they are with completing those recommendations on a regular basis throughout that period. So whether that be every 2 months, every 6 months, every 3 months, that would be up to the committee, but that is considered a best practice. And then what happens with that is at the end of, say, the 18 months, the Auditor General would come in, look at that and provide assurance. And then you would have a sense of whether or not what management has been providing you with all along is sort of the correct information on whether or not the recommendations are completed. So that would be my recommendation, if I could respectfully suggest that. I'm concerned that if I started to follow up all of the audits where there are significant issues identified very regularly, there's quite a process involved in that. We have to meet, we do it at a review level, which is less work than an audit, but it's still a fair bit of work, and it's work on management's part and on our part. And I'd get really worried that we wouldn't get to new audit areas and might only ever be focusing on the stuff that we'd already completed. Trying to look down through some of your other questions, you talked about whether or not we are at risk. I think if you wanted a fulsome answer to that, it would probably be best provided by legal. I can say that ultimately, obviously, compliance is the responsibility of a property owner. However, there's certainly a moral and ethical obligation, I think, on HRM when we're doing fire inspections. And you mentioned order to comply, and I just wanted to clarify something there. An order to comply is enforceable. It's notices to comply that are not, and our understanding is that those are no longer used. However, they were in our sample. And so our concern was that they're not enforceable, and that when orders to comply are issued, if extensions are given or anything like that, it's important to document all the details around that. So I hope that answers your questions.
It does. Thank you very much. And if I may have a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Certainly, go ahead.
So in terms of the best practice and process, so that would that mean then a motion here at this committee to ask for Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency to provide the committee with an action plan within a certain amount of time, for example, 60 days?
Yes, that is generally what it looks like in other jurisdictions. And then if I could sort of lay out what it looks like in other jurisdictions a little further, once that action plan does come to the committee, it wouldn't simply be an information item. It would actually be an agenda item that got spoken to, so that committee members would have an opportunity to ask management questions if you had them. If you think management's timelines are too long, you'd have an opportunity to discuss that. And then similarly, as the updates come through, they would also typically get actually discussed, as opposed to just being an agenda, or sorry, an information item. They would be an actual agenda item.
Great. So, Mr. Chair, would it be appropriate for me to make that motion now, or would you like to wait for the conversation to continue?
I have no problem with that being a motion at this point. Would look to confirm with the clerk or with legal that everything would be in order for making that type of motion, and just ask you to record this motion and just keep a running tally of it while we go in camera and then come back out. But go ahead, Councillor Daigle, Gammon.
So what I would, we might need some wording to construct this in the right way, but I would make the motion that Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency prepare an action plan within 60 days to meet the requirements of the audit.
Second it, Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. And I would look again back to legal to confirm that The Audit and Finance Standing Committee can request that from Halifax Fire, or does that have to be motion from council? And could it return to the Audit and Finance Standing Committee?
That would be a recommendation to council, but having said that, I would suggest you hear from the chief and his staff, because you have management's response to the audit at this point. And I'm not sure how whether the time frame is sufficient, given I understand in part there's some collective bargaining involved and other things. So you might want to hear from the chief on that.
And Mr. Traves, I guess I would agree that there's a response, but it is not an action plan.
I would suggest again that you hear from the chief in terms of whether that's achievable or
not. Okay. Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Councillor Daigle Gammon. Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency, Deputy Chief Beals and Chief Stubing. Are we good to go at this time?
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you clearly now. Yes.
Yeah. Can we just pause for a moment? The chief had to step out to take a call from the CAO.
Sorry, I just asked.
Okay,
yes. He should be here in a few seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Can I call you back in 1 minute after I'm done with the audit? Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Good morning, Chief Stubing. We can hear you at this point. Yes.
I apologize for our technology issue. I think it was a bandwidth issue here. So we're down to one laptop, and we'll have to put people in front of the one laptop from our team. Certainly, we've used this forum many times in presenting to council, where we meet together in our boardroom and use our technology in the boardroom to zoom in on whoever's talking. But we'll do this based on the technology issues we're having here today. So first, I'd like to advise our Audit and Finance Committee that I'm flanked here with some experts from our team. So sometimes we'll defer to some of that expertise. I would start by saying HRFE is fully committed to the first two lines of defense. You've heard me talk about it many times in the past as far as public education and code enforcement, and agrees with the recommendations. Certainly, some of the Auditor General's observations were based on not being able to provide a hard copy or document that addressed what they were looking for. But I would give council some, at least a little bit of assurance that we are aware of many of the issues that were identified in the AG's report, and started work on that shortly after my arrival. So the first thing I would give you, an example of is when we presented to council our new administrative order, we added fire prevention responsibilities to the administrative order, as well as public education, because they were not in there. Certainly, one of the other things we started working on immediately, which the AG's office has identified, is a restructure. So the previous structure had positions responsible for 4 roles. So we have one individual responsible for 4 different responsibilities. That would include inspections, which the audit was looking at, but also fire investigations, public educations, and plans examining, some of which the AG's office identified, i.e., access in and out of communities, emergency access routes, hydrant locations, stuff like that. So that would be a plans examining role. So the difficulty for the branch in the structure the way it was the difficulty in getting people who typically came from the operations side, the firefighter side, trained and competent in being able to do that role. And you can see there's information in the AG's report outlining how difficult it is and how much time it takes to get people trained. So the challenge was maintaining people in the branch that had all the training, because historically they would transition into that role later on in their career. We'd be in the midst of training them. Very fortunate if we were able to get them trained before they retired, but typically they would retire. So we never really had a stable of people who were ready, trained, and equipped, a full group of staff able to do the inspections. So as you know, we are a unionized workforce, and therefore HRFE is obligated to negotiate the change and work responsibilities as it pertains to workers in the union. So it was one of the first orders of business I did to start into that restructure. That was actually already in flight when I got here, and we introduced, as part of that restructure, the fire inspector positions, which were identified by the AG's office. Certainly we can give council more detail, and I think there was mention about going into closed. I would say that we can give you more detail in closed because we are in negotiations on those changes, or in an in-camera session. The model basically was unsustainable and unachievable for a few different issues that have already been shared with you. But the biggest ones were historically the amount of time it took to get people trained and the desire for people who were firefighters to even take on that role, which was the way the structure was set up. So I can certainly share more details with you on that. So we believe we can provide an action plan, certainly within that time period, because we feel we know what our action plan is. There are some things that will take some time to implement, but putting the plan down in paper is certainly not something that we could not achieve in 2 months, largely because we already are in the midst of that plan and all of our team know where we're at in that implementation plan. If that helps, gives you some comfort, certainly we can share more detail in camera if needed.
Thank you for that, Chief Stubing. Just to point out to everyone, the motion that has come back from the clerk's office and from legal is that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council request that Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency Services develop an action plan within 60 days to meet the requirements as outlined in the September 13th, 2021 Management of Inspection Program Audit Report. That is the motion that is on the table at this point. Chief, you have responded to some of the concerns or some of the questions, some of the information from Councillor Daigle Gammon. There were also other items that were previously mentioned, and I'm wondering if you or someone else from Halifax Fire would be able to address other items before we move into the in-camera session.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, as we were dealing with the technology issues, our speakers were going in and out, so we might have missed some of that. I tried to cover most of what I had heard come up as questions by the councillor, but certainly if you could reiterate them, we'll just make sure we cover whatever we can here. I apologize if we missed it as we were trying to get our technology sorted out.
Not a problem. Councillor Morse. Bill?
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering if you could give some specific buildings, subdivisions, and locations for dry hydrants that would be your top concerns.
So if you could just give me a little bit of time, I'll ask my division chief for fire prevention to come over and talk to the building issues, but certainly on the hydrant issues, and I think Councillor Hensby had brought this up, while he prepares to talk to you about the buildings, I will share some details on the dry hydrants identified not only by your question, but Dr. Hens or by Councillor Hensby. That's the second time I've done that, Councillor. Sorry about that. The dry hydrant issue is certainly an issue tied to the plans examining challenges that we have. So again, we'll share more detail in camera if we get an opportunity, but there is a plan to address that issue. But as far as having detailed, documented lists of dry hydrant locations that are required. So we have something in the works right now to address that. But it is a capital item, budget item as identified by Councillor Hensby. And that capital item basically accounts for doing inspections yearly and testing of all the dry hydrants in our system, which we absolutely know where they are. And we go out and test those certainly yearly, but train on them even more often than that. And we always squeeze an addition of a dry hydrant or two based on the money that's in the capital budget. So if there is, and it is a difficult task to add dry hydrants to locations, because a lot of times lakes are landlocked with properties that people need to give us access to. You have to work with the Ministry of the Environment because of turtles laying eggs and environmental concerns. There's only certain times a year that you can actually do construction in those water locations. So it certainly is a laborious task to add even one dry hydrant in a community that's already developed. So the real benefit is actually getting them in location before the community is developed, which is part of the plan moving forward. But to answer your question on the dry hydrants, we become aware of dry hydrants and needs for dry hydrants, and then we chip them off as the capital budget allows us to do that. We know those locations because there's not enough money in the capital budget to do a great number of dry hydrants, so it's not a difficult list for us to stay on top of, but certainly we will take it upon ourselves to make a more thorough list of dry hydrant locations and address them before buildings or communities are established in the first place. So Chief Covey, do you mind talking about the building needs as far as the question on building and occupancy types? Just 1 minute, I'm going to move away from the camera and mic.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. I understand the concern would be obviously that we're not meeting our objectives around legislated inspections. And it is the case that currently we have 8 fire inspectors in employ, and the city is constantly going through a state of change in terms of development. But somewhere around 16,000 buildings that we're responsible to inspect with those 8 individuals. And so we know that we don't have a sufficient number of inspectors to get all that work done. We know that we need more, but only having introduced the position in 2019, we're still not comfortable setting an actual number. How many do we need? In addition to that, it's something that has been mentioned. We know that there's about $1 billion worth of development activity happening in the city every year, which is supervised by 36 building officials. So you've got that kind of a building stock being introduced into the system every year. So we've got 2 competing kind of, there's the existing stock that we have to deal with, and then everything that's being added. So I think you'll see us look at the number of inspectors we have and how many more we need, which is a serious thing that we need to look at and come up with a real number. In addition, the goals that we set for ourselves back in 2009, the longest inspection frequency that we have is 5 years, which is very aggressive. And so we're looking at small mercantile occupancies with an expectation that we're inspecting them once every 5 years, and it's not realistic. But the question is, what is the actual number? And that's something that we need to look at very closely and come up with an answer, so that we can set a realistic target for ourselves that keeps public safety in mind. Right, and so I guess the pandemic has certainly hindered our ability to assess the effectiveness of our fire inspectors due to them being hired, just at the beginning of the pandemic. So hopefully when we get past that, we'll be able to get a better performance measure for their capabilities.
Okay.
One thing.
Go ahead.
Just one last thing I'd like to say is that where our staff are focused right now is on two key areas, or more than two key areas, but basically, as Councillor Hensby alluded to, assembly buildings. We're not focused on bleachers and grandstands. We're focused on areas where people are congregating in large numbers. So bars, restaurants, large arenas, that kind of thing. Staff are very focused there, in addition to where people sleep. And our numbers are strong in those areas. Residential and assembly is where our focus is. And so what happens is we have all these mercantile and personal service occupancies that make our numbers look kind of alarming. And don't get me wrong, they are. But I just want to reassure this group that the resources that we have are being directed at our most vulnerable. Thank you. Sir.
So thank you for that, Chief Covey, and just maybe to add some more thought for Council's consideration. So again, we can share more detail in camera because these are issues that are tied to the restructure and negotiations. But as shared earlier, we implemented the new positions, initially started with 6, increased that to 8 over the next year after we introduced them. And as you might recall, in this last budget, we added 2 more positions. And there certainly is plans for more positions. The challenge with identifying the number of inspectors is until the restructure is done, we will then have a better understanding of the numbers of inspectors we have. Certainly, you will see us ask for more inspectors as we did last year, not only to deal with the current backlog, but also the stuff coming down the pipe from building department as identified by the chief from fire prevention. But we also have the challenges of COVID, not only in the difficulty in restructuring our work to go out and do work in a different world, but also many of those business, particularly those large occupancies that he identified and the small mercantile businesses were really closed during COVID. So it was hard to get out to do inspections in buildings that were closed. So that certainly impacted our numbers. And I think it's also something else that Council needs to understand. Some buildings may require a 2-hour inspection and be fine. Other buildings might require a 3-day inspection and have all kinds of deficiencies, which requires a lot of follow-up and possibly even court time to hold somebody to the fire code requirements. So obviously you can't just say, you have 6,000 buildings and, just picking a number out of the air, and you have, 10 inspectors, therefore you multiply, and inspection takes 15 minutes or 2 hours or whatever it is. It's not a simple math question about number of inspectors. So that's why it's important that we get through our restructure, which is our first priority, and set our policies on the number of inspections that we require to do. And certainly there is earnest effort for us to meet our legislative responsibilities.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does that address any of the issues from Councillors Daigle, Gammon, Hensby, and Morse that might have been missed?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
And procedurally, there's a motion on the floor, so I guess we're still
Yes.
discussing it in a way. So thank you, Chief, for your comments, much appreciated. And I guess it's just it further how do I put this? It just makes me, want this motion even more and this action plan, because if we want to make good decisions around budgeting and funding and structure and procedure, and we have to be evidence-based. So to be able to have the data and that the data can be validated in a very good way, I think that the action plan will help do all those kinds of things and actually be advantageous to Halifax Fire in the long run, because then it's documented, it's measurable, and then it's achievable. So I think that that's an awesome way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know if it's appropriate at this point. I'm looking to the clerk and to legal for this, but would it make sense to extend that motion in the beginning to include the current Auditor General's report and forward that to Halifax Regional Council within this motion, or would that have to be something separate?
I think it's implied in the motion, and in order for council to consider it, it would be attached. But I would point out, Mr. Chair, that the Auditor General has indicated that she would like to address this issue.
Yes, fair enough. Thank you, Evangeline.
Thank you. This is going to seem like a minor point to some, but it is important to me. It's the use of the word requirements. So the motion says to meet the requirements as outlined in the audit. And if it is possible, I respectfully ask that you change that to recommendations. And the reason I ask that is because technically, I can't make management do anything. That's your guys' job. And really, all I can do is make recommendations. And that's the mandate of any Auditor General. And it's the appropriate mandate of any Auditor General. I'll just add. So an Auditor General can only recommend. There's no ability to compel. And requirements might blur that a little bit. So if that was changed to recommendations, I think it would more accurately reflect what an Auditor General report is doing.
Agreed.
Thank you very much for that, Evangeline. That is a significant difference. If there is nothing else at this point, if there is nothing else that can be discussed in open session at this point, although we do have I'm just looking at the new motion that was pasted in the chat. And it looks to me like the only word that was changed was recommendations, which is great. If there is nothing else at this point, can I please have a motion to move in camera?
So moved.
Or I guess I'm going to ask, no, I guess let's move in camera. I was wondering about voting on this motion first, but that can wait till we return to open session.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
So we have a mover.
Sorry,
Yes, Evangeline.
office. We need to leave this meeting and join the other invite, correct?
Through you, Chair. Yes, that is correct. If we could, if I could just clarify who had seconded the motion to go in camera, and then I can kind of give the spiel as to the process.
I will. I shall, Sherry.
Thank you. So all in favor of moving in camera, please signify by saying aye.
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 All right. Okay. Thank you very much. All opposed? Super. Let's move in camera. There is the link that was sent to us in email. We'll see you on the other side.
So just as a reminder to everybody, in order to join the in-camera session, please leave this public session and click that link. And then once we return to the public session, you will rejoin the Zoom meeting itself. So I will see folks over there. Mr. Chair, this is Annie from the clerk's office. We're going to provide people with the ability to unmute and turn their cameras back on. Just a reminder to everybody that we are still in live session, and we'll pull the break screen down and we'll be able to start the meeting again on your call.
So Annie, how many times you get called by your last name?
Every other time, Councillor. The plight of having multiple first names.
I get it. A little while ago, like a couple of weeks ago, I was referred to as Russell Walker.
Oh, they just call me Hensby, that's all.
There you go. Dr. Hensby.
Yes. And don't forget it either.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd like to again welcome everybody back, or most people back to the public session. And we had the chat in the public session before we went in camera. We had the motion in the chat in public session. Thank you. And we are just waiting for everybody to rejoin the public session. Is there anybody who is missing? I think we can continue. So at this point, as a reminder to the committee members, the motion that is on the floor is that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council requests that Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency Services develop an action plan within 60 days to meet the recommendations as outlined in the September 13th, 2021 Management of Fire Inspection Program Audit Report. That has been duly moved and seconded.
Question?
So yeah, is there any further discussion on that motion? And if not, the question has been called. So all in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Great, that motion carries. Thank you very much, everybody. Is there anything else in relation to the Auditor General's report? I haven't heard of any other discussion at this point. And seeing none, I would like to thank Evangeline and Ashley for all the work that you do and the report that you have prepared today. And thank you for being available and providing such fulsome responses to the questions that we have had.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say a really quick thank you to the team that worked on this audit for all of their hard work throughout. And thank you very much for the meeting this morning.
Thank you. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is item 12.2.1, funding of station alerting projects. And I don't believe, I'm just looking for my notes, I don't believe we have a presentation on this. We do have people from Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency on the call to be able to answer questions. Over to the clerk's office, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Where it's 11:59, I would just welcome a motion from the committee, should it be their will, to extend the meeting time today.
I'll move, Mr. Chairman, to extend the meeting by an hour.
Thank you, Councillor Hensby. Do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second, Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. All in favor of extending the meeting past 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. So again, the item is 12.2.1. Can I have someone put the motion on the floor, please? And the motion is in the chat. Thank you, Annie.
Mr. Chair.
David, you're on mute.
Oh, thought I was off. That the Audit and Finance Standing Committee approve the transfer $275,000 from the capital project CI 190005 intelligent dispatching to the capital project CI 210013 station alerting in the 21-22 fiscal year.
Thank you. That has been moved. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Anybody?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Morris, for seconding that. Councillor Hensby, do you have any questions in relation to that?
No, I don't. No, I don't, sir.
Okay, thank you. And over to the other committee members. If you have any questions, please signify that in the chat. In the meantime, I do. And this is transferring $275,000 as a one-time transfer from one account to another, both proceeding with similar projects. I'm wondering if in future years there would be an additional amount of funds required to be transferred back, or would the intelligent dispatching just be able to be completed with $275,000 less? I'm wondering if we could have a response from Halifax Fire on that.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, members of council, thank you. My camera, I'll set that up so you can actually see me. My apologies. Here we are.
There we are.
Yeah, I've got a couple colleagues with me. I have Division Chief Nearing from Fire, and I know in attendance is also the project manager, John Fenton, so I'll invite them to comment. I would anticipate that we may see requests for adjustments in the 4-year and 10-year plan with regard to intelligent dispatching in future years. We're very early in the progress for intelligent dispatching, and we want to, among other things, understand with greater certainty what our costs around that project will be. But we're aware in this current fiscal year that we're in a situation where we have two very important projects that, as I think members of the committee understand, are all about getting firefighters to emergencies quickly. They're also about giving you reliable data when we give you performance statistics. And right now we can't really move this year in a meaningful way on either project. So we believe it's prudent and reasonable to get station alerting moving, to get those benefits to our residents in the quickest way that we can.
Okay. I think that answers it, in that it says that we will have to look for future years to see what happens in future years. But okay, are there any other questions from the committee on this? Not seeing any. All of those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda, I'm going to switch things around a little bit if the committee members don't object. I don't anticipate that there would be a whole lot of discussion around the Graham's Grove facility, but there would be a fair amount of discussion about the first quarter financial report, maybe. So if the committee is in accepting of it, excuse me, I'd like to proceed with 12.2.3, tender 21-175, the Graham's Grove facility. And I'm wondering if I could have someone put that motion on the floor.
I can do that, Mr. Chair, if you'd like.
Thank you. Do you have the motion with you?
I do.
Okay.
Move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Regional Council 1 approve an unbudgeted withdrawal in the amount of $639,621 net HST included from the general contingency reserve Q421 and 2, increase the 2021-22 capital project number CB20000010 regional park washrooms by $639,621 net HST included, and 3, approve an increase of $18,361 net HST included to RHAD Architects, PO 20708333916 for additional consulting services with funding from project account number CB200010 regional park washrooms, and 4, award tender number 21175 Grahamsboro facility to the lowest bidder meeting specifications, Avondale Construction Limited, at a cost of $2,299,165 net HST included, with funding from project account number CB 2000010 regional park washrooms, project number CB 190008 energy efficiency initiatives, project account number CB 190009 environmental remediation, building demolition, and CB 200012 Halifax 2050 climate action plan as outlined in the financial section of this report.
Thank you, Councillor Daigle Gammon, for reading that book.
Yeah.
Can someone second that, please?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy. Councillor Daigle Gammon, do you have anything on that?
No, actually, the report I felt was very well written and pretty much self-explanatory for me.
Okay.
I got one question.
Councillor Hensby, go ahead.
I'm just hoping that construction will be done in time before the World Championship paddling is supposed to be done in what, 2022, was it? There was all hope to have this infrastructure put in place by the time the World Championship paddling was going to occur. Is that still on target?
Do we have somebody who would be able to respond to that? John McPherson. Hello, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, yes, following this this approval and subsequent council approval, we'll be looking to get started before the winter season, and we'll be striving to be completed for the summer season of next year.
You say summer season, that's still before the paddling competition?
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, I'd have to go back and look at the exact dates, and we'd be happy to get back to the councillor on that.
Thank you. It'd be critical we meet those timelines. Thank you.
John, is that something that you would be able to get back to either the committee or all of Regional Council on, please?
Absolutely, yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Are there any further questions in relation to this motion? Not seeing any. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great. Thank you very much for that. At this point, I'd like to jump back to the to item 12.2.2, the first quarter 2021-22 financial report. And Dave Hurley, good afternoon, I suppose. I understand you have a presentation for us at this point?
Yes, we do have a presentation.
Okay, thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay, let me just pull that up.
Perfect.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Good afternoon, Dave Harley, Director of Accounting and Financial Reporting. And as we said, I'm here to take you through the first quarter financial report. We'll start with the general rates surplus. So we are currently projecting a surplus of $12.2 million for the current year. In large part, this is due to a delay in the receipt of our fall debenture from the Municipal Financing Corporation. We didn't receive that money until May of this year, and we'd actually budgeted to receive it in our prior year. So what that has done is actually pushed our 12-month payment for principal and interest out into our fiscal 22-23, resulting in a $9.6 million surplus in the current year. We've also seen an increase in D-transfer tax of $5 million due to the continued activity in the residential real estate market. We've seen an increase in permit revenues of $2.4 million, and we've actually seen a bit of a decrease in compensation and benefits of $1.9 million. Offsetting these, we are still seeing a decrease in our transit fare revenues of about $1.5 million and an increase in our fuel expenses of about $2.2 million over what we budgeted. We've also seen an increase in operating cost of capital expenses of $2.9 million in the current year. We're continuing to monitor certain risks and opportunities that may affect these projections. So currently, we still have we're still looking out for impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as obviously their impact on our transit ridership levels. We know there's always weather-related impacts that may have some significant impacts on our bottom line, and finally, commodity costs as they fluctuate throughout the year in terms of fuel, diesel, salt. So we get a better handle on those later on in the year. Moving into our councillors' funds, we have our district capital funds. We have a total budget of $3 million. So far to date, we've spent $1.3 million, and we have an additional $1.7 million available to spend by the end of the year. In terms of our activity funds, there's a $72,000 budget. We've spent $9.1 thousand, so we still have $62.9 thousand available to spend by the end of the year. And you can see details of the individual councillors' funds in attachments 3 and 4 of the report. Moving on to our recreation area rates. We started the year with a surplus of $1.3 million, and throughout the first quarter, there's been no real significant spending that's happened at this point. So we're still sitting at that surplus of $1.3 million as of June 30th. In terms of our reserves, we're projecting an available balance in our reserves at March 31st to be $331.6 million. And looking forward to the next several years, we see a continual increase up to $342.5 million in 22-23, $350 million in 23-24, and up to $399 million by 24-25. And you can see attachment 6 for additional details on the individual reserves. Looking at our aged accounts receivable, we currently have property taxes outstanding of $26.2 million, local improvement charges of $10.2 million, PILT of $0.6 million, and general revenues of $8 million. And attachment 7 will provide additional information as to what makes up those tolls. Speaking of our capital projections, we have currently expenditures of $342.9 million, excuse me, as of June 30th, was our budget, sorry. We've spent $21.8 million, and we're projecting an additional $236 million in expenditures by the end of the year. So we're projecting to carry forward right now $85.1 million in capital. Looking at hospitality expenses for the quarter, as we've seen all throughout the last year, due to COVID-19, we're really not seeing any hospitality expenditures for the municipality at this time. And finally, moving on to our expenses for reportable individuals, we have a total expense of $4,259 for the quarter. Majority of that is local travel, and then some development and training that was related to the FCM conference this year. And that concludes the presentation, so we'll now go back for any questions.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dave. For any committee members, if you have any questions, please signify that in the chat. Go ahead, Councillor Morse. There is also a motion on the floor. Sorry, there is also a motion available. Would you mind putting that on the floor?
I'm sorry. Someone else do that. I apologize. I don't have it in front of me.
I can paste that into the chat.
The motion is that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee forward the first quarter 21-22 financial report to Regional Council for their information.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hensby. Councillor Morse, would you like to second that and then proceed with your questions?
Yes, I'll second that. Thank you. And my only question concerns just the cost overruns that we're seeing on projects in the last number of months that we've had to approve extra funding for. And it seems there's an overall trend to capital projects being more expensive than initially budgeted. I'm wondering if that's anticipated to have an impact on our budget going forward.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. I expect we will see some of that continuing, especially as we know in a lot of our supplies that we're purchasing for a lot of these things, we are seeing increases in expenses due to a number of different factors, but that will have an impact that we'll have to factor in at our budget time as we go forward. I don't know, Jerry, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dave. Jerry Blackwood, CFO. You know, a couple of points there. For one, yes, we are seeing some cost increases. A lot of that is driven by supply and demand on material supply chain issues. And, you know, I think, you know, when you go back to the Cogswell presentation, you know, yesterday, Donna highlighted that as, you know, certainly a risk to that project. You know, that is a risk with other projects, smaller scale. So you look at like Graham's Grove, for example. Those cost escalations, you know, we have a capital working group that's all our project managers, engineers, architects, etc. We have provided direction that, you know, we, as we bring forward the capital budget, those cost pressures and inflationary items are being addressed. And just another point, I know, you know, the terms of reference of audit and finance are all cost escalations and budget increases come through this committee. And during COVID, we've laxed those rules that they can move through regional council. But we're getting back to just normal practice of having all that be vetted through audit and finance in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Councillor Daigle Gammon has asked if a copy of the presentation could be forwarded to us, so I would appreciate that. I'm curious about the property taxes outstanding, and I'm wondering if that is in line, or do we anticipate that we would be able to recover from the taxes outstanding? Is that normal at this stage in the year for that amount to be outstanding?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I can take that question. Yeah, before I was CFO, I was a municipal treasurer for approximately 12 years, so very familiar with receivables. I would say that that is a very healthy receivable position that we're in, especially considering, you know, coming through a COVID year. You know, I know going in, we did feel that there was going to be some risk around, you know, ability to pay. But, you know, it exceeded our expectations, and our receivables, you know, overall are in very, very good shape. And, you know, our KPIs around our churn in terms of receivables is in a healthy position, as well as our cash flow. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Once again, I'm looking to any of the other councillors to see if there are any questions related to this first quarter report. Councillor Purdy.
Hi there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if this is even the appropriate place to ask this question, but just wondering, with the increase of the revenues from the deed transfer tax, if there's any way, or if this is even possible, to think about putting some of that surplus back into helping with the housing crisis, or some help for folks who need it. Is there any conversation about that, or like what to do with the surplus? If it could be put back into our city in those very basic, helpful ways?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councillor. You know, what I can say is in terms of where we end up in terms of our overall year-end surplus, then you know, we would bring a recommendation back to council of how those surplus funds would be distributed. So if you recall, you know, it was just a month or so ago, we had our year-end financial statements where, you know, we recommended that we put our surplus into our reserves. What I will say is that the motion that council approved 2 weeks ago at council with providing the CAO with discretionary spending of up to $500,000 for the housing crisis, that is being funded out of fiscal services, which is where the transfer tax revenue resides. So in some sense, we're using some of our projected surplus to fund that initiative that council approved 2 weeks ago. Thank you.
Thank you.
I make the analogy that the council is very familiar with football game. This is only the first quarter. There's still more 3 quarters of the game you have to play. We don't know what's going to happen during the next 3 quarters in regards to fiscal positioning. So hopefully we'll come out well advanced for the 3rd quarter, going into the final 2 minutes, and then we can decide what we can do with any surpluses.
Yeah, I remember former CAO, Mr. Butt said one time it could start to snow in December, right to March 31st. We certainly wouldn't want that to happen, but you know, we do have a healthy surplus, and you know, as Dave pointed out, there's about, I think it's not close to $10 million is just on that timing issue on our debenture. So, you know, in terms of an overall surplus, it would be reasonable to put that money back into probably like the debt and principal reserve, because that's what that money was budgeted for, was interest payments on our debentures. So certainly we'll see, as Councillor Hensby said, there's still a ways to go, but you know, we're in a good position moving forward. And you know, deed transfer tax continues to show to be very healthy. You know, the Micmac Mall just sold a couple of weeks ago, so that hasn't been factored into that projection there. So you know, it could be, you know, $2 to $3 million deed transfer tax just on that one sale alone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Councillor Purdy, does that address your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I don't see any other questions from any other members of council. I don't have any. This is a 1st quarter report. So it's good to see where we are at this point. And at this point, I would, not seeing any further questions, like to ask any members or like to call for the question. So all members in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Great, that motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody. We have addressed 12.2.3. The next items on the agenda should be fairly quick. Grants Committee, there is none. Committee members, there is none. Motions, there is none. We have had our in-camera session and there is not a further one. There are no added items. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none. The next item on the agenda is public participation, and there were no registered speakers for public participation by 4:30 p.m. on the deadline for this meeting, for the business day before, which was yesterday. The date of the next Audit and Finance Committee meeting is October 20th, 2021. With fingers crossed, we will be in person for this one. I don't know. And so the next item on the agenda is adjournment. Could I have someone move the adjournment, please?
So moved.
Thank you very much, Councillor Daigle Gammon. We stand